Hey, what's up? Hope everyone's doing all right. So this is week 43. And remember, if you read about 14 pages of the Bible, I separate into into 50 different sections, then you get through the Bible in 1 year. There's about 52 point something weeks in a year, so it gives you 1 week in the beginning of the year that you don't need to do anything, and then at least another week at the end of the year. So every year you should be able to get through the Bible if you split it into 50 different sections. 50 is a great number. Or at least it's an easy number. I don't know how great it is, but it's an easy number to understand and to compute and to organize your routines around. So, like I said, today is week 43, so it's First John through all of John. So it's just all of the Gospel of John, John 1 through John 21, and so I listened to some of it today, and I read some of it, and so I've read the Bible all the way through from the beginning to the end. I've also listened to the Bible all the way through the beginning to the end, and so this time I'm reading it most of the time, and then also listening to some of it, doing the dramatized version. Mostly I think I've read all of the Old Testament and the New Testament so far. I've listened to a lot of it just because when I had the dramatized version of it, I went along with it or listened along with the dramatized version that I have to make sure that all the words are correct, because one of the issues that I run into is that when you get the Bible and you get like an audible, when the people are reading it, a lot of the words that they read are incorrect. So at least the King James version, I think it's kind of hard for anybody to kind of read it word for word. And so, but the dramatized version, the one that I have, at least from my understanding when I went through with it, all the words are said correctly. Like there's no words that are not correct. And I think a lot of it's because it's dramatized, so you have people saying individual lines instead of one narrator going through and reading all of it, and that's really easy to make mistakes when you're doing that. But if you're doing it like a play, then each word is a little bit different, and so I think that's easier to make sure that each word is correct. And so I'm still going through the different parables. Those are kind of the things. So on week 40, or I guess week 39, when we started the New Testament, and I think week 42, I did, kind of what the New Testament with all the Gospels, it kind of summed them up into 2 weeks. And then after that, the next 3 weeks, 41, 42, and 43, I just split up in different parables and kind of reflect on the different parables. And so Monday I have the Good Shepherd. And so you have the parable of the Good Shepherd. And with the parable of the Good Shepherd, for whatever reason, this one's kind of difficult for me to remember. Okay, what is the parable of the Good Shepherd? Like, which one is that one? And it's the one where Jesus talks about that he's the Good Shepherd, and that there's a many before him that were hired servants. And so he's the Good Shepherd, and because he's the Good Shepherd and he's not a hired servant, then he protects the flock. And those that are before him were the hired servants, and so they didn't protect the flock. And so I think that, if I was to say I'm a shepherd and then I have my flock, like, a lot of pastors do, or a lot of preachers do, they say, okay, I'm a shepherd and I have my flock. I don't think that they're shepherds, because they're not going to lay down their life for their sheep. And they might have like good intentions, like, yes, I would, but I don't think they would. Not knowing that Jesus did, they're not going to go and, go on the cross and get and that's not something that they would do. And so those that are before it, they're like priests. They're like the hired hands, right? Like they don't own the sheep, but Christ owns the sheep. And so if you're a pastor, you don't own the sheep, you're a hired hand. Like maybe like in some ways, like you're there and you're doing your job, but you don't own the sheep. They're not your sheep, they're Christ's sheep. There's one shepherd and one flock. And so to say that you wouldn't lay down your life for the sheep, you wouldn't do what Christ did for his. And so to say that you would, I think it's just lying, and you're misleading yourself, and you're misleading those that follow you. And so that's, I think, the Good Shepherd. The main idea is that Christ is the shepherd and we're all part of his flock. And we can be higher, like we can do certain jobs, and we can do things that Christ wants us to do, and we're co-heirs, but we're not in charge of the sheep. We don't own the sheep. Christ owns the sheep, and so we're not the shepherds. We're the hired hands. And when the wolves come, when really crappy stuff happens, like, it's just human nature to sin and to flee. And I think that really, when it comes down to it, I think that everyone everyone sins, and I think that we all are going to flee. We all would flee except for Christ. He's the only one that's not going to flee, because he's like, Christ, and he can do these things, and he owns us. And to say that you would not fully, then I just don't think you're just an ignorant statement, because you don't really understand existence. That's how I feel. I could be completely wrong. I can be misinterpreting that, and maybe one day I'll understand it better. But that, from where I am in my life right now, that's what I understand for the Good Shepherd, that parable, and kind of what it means today and how I reflect on it. All right, Tuesday I have plank in the eye. And so you have this, this is a really common one that most people understand. It's like, do not judge. Why do you judge with your brother when he's got a speck in his eye and you have a plank in your eye? And so I think this is really important, that we just don't judge other, Christ tells us not to judge another man's servant. Like, we're not to judge other Christians. I think that it's hard to because you want to distinguish, and you want to understand, and you want to make wise choices around people around you. But you don't want to judge them. I think judging is condemning them. I think judging is, the way that Christ is, what he's saying when he's using this word, is like, you can't condemn somebody and say, okay, they're going to go to hell, or that they're going to go to hell. You can say what they're doing is wrong, but you sin too. What you're doing is wrong too. And you can have righteous judgment, because Christ tells us to have righteous judgment. From understanding, at least, that's what he tells us to do. And this is like righteous judgment as far as like obeying laws, and having to understand like who you shouldn't, because in the letters, I think it's Paul. I'm not exactly sure who wrote it, but it's like the idea, like, we're supposed to, not to deal with people that aren't, deal with people that aren't Christian in certain regards. Like, it talks about, what does Beelzebub have to do with Christ? What does light have anything to darkness? Like, we're not supposed to commune with people that aren't Christian. And so I think that this means, like, you don't want to invite somebody into your home and break bread with somebody and be like friends with somebody who's not a Christian, but you want to be acquaintances with people. You can't like just not be acquaintances with people that aren't Christian. Like, you should be acquaintances with people you work with, if they're not Christian or not, but you shouldn't be friends with anybody that's not a Christian. And you want to, so this is like, you want to be able to determine if people are right, and you want to have righteous judgment, but you don't want to condemn. And so I think this is what we're talking about with the plank in the eye. Like, you can't be, okay, that person's going to hell when, like, you're a sinner too, and you don't know what that person's going through, and what that person has to do, and what that person's experience, and their struggles. And so you're not for to condemn anyone and say they're going to go to hell, but you are to, like, obviously a judge that have to follow laws, and you have to execute righteous judgment, and you want to determine if someone's good or bad, and how you want to commune with them, how you want to interact with them. Like, that's something that we're supposed to do. And so but this is like kind of that difference. Like, you have to have Christ. It's almost like and everything that you do to do it correctly, like, man can't do it, and Christ talks about this too. Like, what's impossible for man is possible for God. And they're like, who, I think it talks about it's harder for, or easier for a camel to pass through a needle's eye than for a rich man to go to heaven. They're like, how can any man be saved? And the disciples say that, or this is like the response it gets, and it's like in Christ to say something to the effect of, like, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And I think that what this means is that in order for you to be able to determine when you should have righteous judgment and when you should not judge, is pretty much a miracle for you to understand that every single time that you do that. Only with God can you truly understand these situations that come about and the right choices to make. If you didn't have God, and God's not in your eye, in your life, and you don't have the truth, then you can't make the difference. You can't make the differentiation between righteous judgment and how you're supposed to act. It takes a miracle to be able to understand how to interact in certain situations, and how to interact with people, and to do the right things. And you're never going to be able to do the right thing unless God does it. And so you can't. And so I think this is what Christ means when he talks about with man, none of this is possible. With God, all things are possible. And so it's like a miracle. And just like, I think that having a relationship, like a healthy relationship with a male and a female, I think it's like a miracle. And I think that in order for you to have a healthy relationship with the people around you, with other humans, it takes a miracle. And unless you have Christ and God in your life, you're never going to have a healthy relationship with anybody. Because the only way to have it is by miracles, for you to understand the judgment and the righteous judgment. And so without God giving you this understanding and intervening in your life and taking control, like, you'll never be able to make these calls correctly. Okay, and then so for Wednesday I have separate the good and bad fishes. So last week I had wheat and tares, and so this is really similar to the wheat and tares. You see how they separate the good and bad fishes. And so I don't really know that there's a difference between the two, except for it's just trying to explain it two different ways to two different types of people. You have farmers and you have fishermen, and you have different people that have different understandings and different aspects in their life. And so I think these parables are similar. They mean pretty much the same thing. It's just two different people for them to understand different things. And so I'm not exactly sure if this is true or this has a different meaning than the wheats and tares, the good and bad fishes, but I think that they're pretty much the same thing, or they have the same idea. It's just trying to communicate an idea to two different types of people. And I could be wrong, and maybe they have different meanings, or maybe they have slightly different meanings, but I think that the idea is that you have these different or you have these similar ideas or these same ideas, but they're just communicated in different ways. And I think the same thing, you have the four gospels, right? Like, I think that you have the same idea, but it's communicated in different ways. Or maybe there's something that can be gleaned from a different gospel, and something that can be gleaned from these two different tares, or these two different analogies that seem to have the same idea, the separation of good and bad, the goats and the sheep, the wheats and the tares, and the good and bad fishes. But I'm not sure. I think it's kind of good to have both of these, just because that way you can kind of reflect on the idea: are these parables meaning the exact same thing, and for understand, but just meant to be understood by different people, or do these parables have different meanings? So I guess it's good to have it in there just so you can kind of reflect on that. So for Thursday, I have rich man and Lazarus, and so this is always a kind of difficult one for me, because it's like the rich man did really well and Lazarus had sores, and so Lazarus seems to be in heaven, or in a place of good place, and then Lazarus seems to be in a bad place because he had his good stuff in life. And so, like, what exactly does this mean? Should you never aspire to be rich because you're just aspiring to try to go to hell? I mean, it's possible. I just have to reflect on this one a little bit more and try to understand it, because I'm not quite sure. Because I definitely want to be rich. I want to be rich. I want to have money. I want to be able to have a lot of money, mainly because I want to have a wife, I guess, and so to provide for a woman. And that's why God, tells us that it's better for us not to marry, because then we're going to have, we're going to care about things of this world instead of caring about things of God. If I didn't want to have a wife, then I wouldn't really care about riches. They wouldn't really help me. But I also want to make a difference, and I feel like with money I can make a difference. And I want to have more pleasure and less pain. The more money I have, the more pleasure I have, and the less money I have, usually the more pain I have. And so, I mean, should you just never aspire? Should you not want to aspire to be rich? Because if you aspire to be rich, you're going to go to hell. I don't really know. And what is rich? Is rich wealthy? And so I don't really know. And I think about this one often. And I mean, is it just you're rewarded? And so he gives this analogy. But I mean, there are rich people. Like King David, and he was super rich, and Solomon and rich, but David was super rich, and he seems to be, God seems to love him. And you also have Abraham, and he was rich, and God loved him. But I mean, it's a different type of richness. And so sometimes I think it's rich in the fact that you have money, you built up barns, but you're not using them. You're just sitting on them. But if you're rich and you're using all your money in investments, and you're not really rich necessarily, you have a lot of wealth, but you're not rich because your wealth is just spent on other things. You're worth a lot of money, but you don't have a lot of money. So I think there's a difference between being worth a lot of money and then having a lot of money. If you're worth a lot of money, then you're having all your money and it's being spent into different endeavors to help mankind. But if you have a lot of money, your money just sitting, and it's just used to, for personal gain. But wealth, I think, is used for societal gain. So I think that if you have a lot of wealth, if you're worth a lot, then that's good, because then you have a lot of help in the society. But you have a lot of money, then you're rich, and that's not good because you're just hoarding money. So I think there's a difference between being rich and being wealthy, and I think what you want to try to esteem to is being wealthy, so that way that you can help your fellow man instead of being rich where you're just kind of helping yourself. So maybe those are the differences between the two. And maybe Lazarus was just a rich man. He just had a lot of whatever he wanted. But if you're wealthy, you can't. You have a lot of your money's tied into a lot of things. You don't really have anything you want, but you're just worth a lot. So maybe that's the difference between the two. Okay, and then so Friday, which is today, I have two sons, one obeys, one does not. And so I was thinking about that today, and I think that, is it better to, what if the one son's like, okay, well, I'm not going to go, and then he goes anyways. But if he's like, okay, I want to go, and he goes too, like, that's better than saying I don't want to go and then going. And then the son who doesn't go, is it better for him to be like, I'm not, or I am going to go, because in his heart at that time he does want to, and then doesn't want to go, and then doesn't end up going? Is that better than him saying, no, I'm not going to go in the first place, I'm gonna sin, and then he just keeps sinning? And so I think that it depends on the situation, and sometimes the situation can be different. But I think the thing that I kind of like thought about today, that it was really interesting. I kind of lost it here for a second. I'm trying to find it. There's the two sons. So I think a lot of it depends on, like, okay, so if you in your heart, you're going to serve God in a certain way, like you're going to, what is the way? I don't know. Like, if God tells you to do something in your life, like for me to make these YouTube videos, right, and to make them every week, if in my heart I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna make these YouTube videos. I'm gonna read the Bible, the whole entire Bible through, and so like I'm studying the Word and I'm making the YouTube videos. If in my heart I say this, but then I don't end up doing it, then why would I not do it? And I think that what happens is that what influences you, like whose voice do you hear? If I hear God's voice, then I'll continue to make the videos and I'll do the videos like I'm supposed to, because that's what God wants me to do. But if I'm like, okay, I'm going to make these videos, I'm going to do it for a year, I'm going to read the whole entire Bible in a year, but then I don't end up doing it because of whatever reason, that I'm listening to the devil's voices. So like, who persuades you? Who do you listen to? Do you listen to God when God tells you what to do, or do you listen to the devil when the devil tells you what to do? And it's hard to know, because maybe God doesn't want me to make this video. So if I didn't make them, then I would be listening to God. And so I think that this parable is really, the heart of the matter is that who persuades you? Who do you listen to? When you have an idea, like when you want to do something, like your heart might be in the right place, like you want to do it, but then at the end of the day, when the situation comes about, and then like the many steps to the outcome of the situation, who do you listen to when it comes to what steps you should go down, and what steps you should take, and what avenues that you should follow to come to the end result? And so I think a lot of it is, you're going to make a choice of you, like you have a choice, you have this freedom of choice to make this thing. And then, are you going to be able to be persuaded by good, or are you going to be able to be persuaded by bad? Like, who are you going to listen to? Like, you have your choice that you make, and everybody makes a choice, but then you're influenced by good or bad, and so you hear one or the other. And so who are you influenced by, and who do you follow? Like, who's your master? And so that's when you're doing the will of God, is when your master is God, and that's when you're doing the will of the devil, is when your master is the devil. And that can be seen by the outcome of your actions, and not the choice that you make initially, but the outcome of your choices that you make, and what you end up doing, instead of what you say you're going to do or what you want to do at that given time. But with the event, the outcome of the event, what actually happens. So that's what I was thinking of a lot today, and that was kind of a newer thought for me, so I thought that was pretty cool. But at any rate, okay, so trying to make this video between 15 and 20 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and end it now, and I just hope everyone's doing okay. I hope everyone's doing good. God bless, and happy truth seeking.